The Girl in the Rain. It was a night not to be out. Rain poured from the sky, and I was driving home around 3:30 in the morning, on a road that was tree-lined and dark without streetlights. Not to mention, it was twisting left and right along the jagged coastline on my left. It would only be visible once in a while when the trees would be separated and I could actually see the ocean. It was difficult enough to navigate it in the day, and even harder to see it at night, let alone with the rain falling so hard. I came around this sharp right-hand turn, and to my surprise I saw a young woman in her early 20s, or maybe early 30s, hitchhiking. She was alone, and so was I. So without even thinking, I pulled over, and she ran up to the car and looked in, paused for a second, and then got in. "Thank God you stopped," she said, as she closed the door of the car. I said, "It's a wet night." She said, "You were the only car I saw, and I've been walking for the last half hour." "If you don't mind me asking," I said, "what the hell are you doing hitchhiking at this hour of the night?" "Me and my boyfriend got in a fight, and he kicked me out of the truck," she replied. "I'm trying to get home. I live in the next cove over, about a half-hour drive from here." I told her I'd drive her home, but added and said, "No offense, but that's not right to dump you out over an argument and leave you in the middle of the night on an empty stretch of road in the middle of nowhere. That's dangerous." She agreed and said, "I know. Besides, I hate this road. When I was 13, I was walking home to my aunt's house around 11:30. It wasn't a far walk, but this road doesn't have streetlights because not enough people live on it. And I was walking from my friend's house, and as I was walking I started to hear this noise of something in the bushes beside me, like a deer or something, walking and crunching the limbs of trees. I never even really thought about it, because I was close enough to my aunt's house I could see the porch light. So I'm walking, and this sound is still going on, and generally keeping up with my pace. It's not beside me, but it's lagging back, behind me, about 8 to 10 feet away, in the bushes. I'm not scared, but I got curious to see what it was, and I stopped and turned to look in the woods and see if I could see anything. When I stopped, it stopped. And just as I started looking in the general direction of the sound, in the darkness, a cell phone lit up and started ringing in the bushes in front of me. A silhouette of a man's hand quickly covered it up. I swear to God I never ran so fast in my entire life to my aunt's house. I never found out who it was, but I'll never forget that moment in my life. And being on the same road tonight terrified me and made me think of that night all over again. "Holy shit, that terrified me too," I said. I got the girl home, safe, and I hope her and her boyfriend worked things out. But I still drive that road from time to time, and I always think of that night I came across the girl in the rain. The radio. My dad died in 2011, and he was the type of man who listened to the news on the radio his whole life. As long as I knew him, he always listened to the radio. Some of my strongest memories of him involve the radio. I remember one night years ago. My brother and I were waiting for our mom, with her dad, to come out of a bingo hall, where she was playing bingo. The players were filing out through the door of the hall, and as we sat there in the pickup truck, waiting for her, we were listening to the news, out of New York. And the announcer stopped in the middle of the news broadcast and said something I remember to this day. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a breaking news bulletin. John Lennon of the Beatles has been shot tonight outside of his New York home." A lot of the memories I had of my father involved the news, or listening to overnight talk radio shows like Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. When he died in November of 2011, my brother and I were driving to the funeral home to meet up with the rest of the family to make arrangements for Dad's funeral. As we were talking and driving through the night, we heard an announcer's voice come out of nothing and get louder and louder. We both looked at the radio, and to our amazement, the radio had turned on and was on the news. And in front of both of us watching, the volume bars were climbing up, as if some unseen hand was turning up the volume. As soon as I saw it was the news, I knew it was Dad. My brother said, "That's the third time that's happened today." I said, "I'm sure it's just Dad telling us he's all right." It never happened again, but I'm sure it was Dad saying hello and still enjoying the news. The Gift. It was 2014. I was working for a trucking company that hauled water to camps up north in the wintertime. I was working on the night shift from 5 p.m. till 3 a.m. Our shop was very remote in the woods. It consisted of a simple mobile home, converted into an office, lunchroom, bathroom, and a changing room, where we would take off our insulated overalls and boots and hang the overalls up in our separate coat racks that stood like stalls beside each other. Our boots were put inside a wooden box at the base of each stall. That way, each person had their own box for their boots, and it would double as a place to sit down and put on your boots at the start of your shift. One night I got back around 2:30 in the morning. I walked in the door of the trailer, and to my right was the lunchroom. And at the far end of the office on the right side was an actual office. And to my left, immediately, there was the door to the changing room. And the bathroom was directly across from me, because when you came in the door, you were standing in a hallway. I turned to my right and walked into the lunchroom, and sat at the table and began doing my paperwork that I always do at the end of my shift. I was the only one who worked night shift, so I was alone in the trailer. As I was working, I heard something fall in the changing room. It sounded as if it was metal, like a quarter or maybe a silver dollar. It had that clinkety-clankety kind of sound that you would hear if you flipped a coin and let it land on a wooden table. Curious, I got up to investigate. I walked into the changing room and looked around, but didn't see anything out of place. Then I noticed something that changed my life. When I was young, my father was a fairly religious guy. He wasn't at church every Sunday, but he could debate the Bible with anyone. He wore a small silver chain around his neck with a little medal hanging off of it every day of his life. It was a little medal that had the Virgin Mary on it on one side, and on the other side it had a crucifix. When he died, we buried him beside Mum, still wearing that medal around his neck. It never left his body, ever, even when he went to shower. That night up north in the changing room, I turned around and was about to leave and chalk the whole noise thing up to like a little mouse or something, when I got a glint of something that caught my eye. I looked down and saw that very same type of metal sitting on the top of my boot box, upright and laying straight, just as if someone had laid it down. It shocked me to see that very same metal again. I picked it up and dropped it on the wooden box from about 2 inches high, and it made the exact same sound I had heard only a few minutes earlier. My father was the kind of guy who always took care of his family. He brought us home treats every single day of his working career. When Dad passed away, we never left anything unsaid between us. He wasn't as much my father as he was my best friend at that point. He had lost his wife and my mother 15 years earlier. They were a very close couple. So knowing they're back together again makes me kind of happy for them. I can't say for sure it was a gift from my father, but no one at the shop is religious. And seeing as though it made the exact same sound when I dropped it as when I heard it first fall, I can't help but believe it is from Dad. If those on the other side of eternity can pass on little gifts to those of us on this side, I can totally see the old man doing that very thing. And it wouldn't be unlike Dad to not let each of his kids know him and Mom are doing great on the other side, and they are all still with us.